I think the role of this conference is to review what has been achieved by India during the last 63, 64 years after becoming independent, and see what is happening around the world and where do we stand. Then, in the national context, what we have been able to do and what are the achievements and what are the gaps. If there are gaps, then what are the reasons and in what way we can fill the gaps through state intervention and the intervention by private sector and other players.
Yeah. Professor Ramanujam, there are so many policy issues in India related to education. I think, according to you, what measures should be taken to ensure quality education to the larger population?
I think everybody knows about the issues. The issues are basically three. Access, which means everybody should get an opportunity to go to the school, to the college, to the university. Then the next issue is quality. So you can open any number of schools, colleges and universities, but whether you have the comparable quality of education. Third issue is equity. You can't have top class institutions for a small population, a small section, the elite section of the society, and then the rest will go to mediocre schools, and still some will be left out without any kind of higher education or even basic education. So, if you look at the three issues with an objective mind, then the policy priorities will be very clear. And these policy priorities, once understood correctly, will also require resources, physical resources, financial resources, human resources. Unless we make all these resources available according to the needs that are to be met, then the policies will exist only as policies on paper. So that's where we have to think very critically and move forward.
Professor Ramanujam, do you think that public-private partnership model is workable in education sector? What are the issues and what are the challenges?
Yes, it is workable provided we have proper regulatory mechanisms. I personally would feel that the major role with regard to education at whatever level, primary level, secondary level, higher education level, or vocational education, skills development, in all these, the role of the state is primary. And the private sector can contribute in a number of ways. What is right now happening is, in India, all the public funded institutions, they are asking for more money, more autonomy, more human resources. Private sector, they have invested a large amount of capital. They have created excellent physical infrastructure and they are able to attract huge number of students, at least during the last 10-15 years. But then their faculty, I don't think is comparable with the faculty that you have in public funded institutions. So the faculty is a concern for them. And then research facilities, I think they don't exist in equal measure either in public institutions or in private institutions. And therefore, if we have a regulatory mechanism to see what kind of faculty should be there, what should be the minimum infrastructure facilities, what should be the salary structure for the faculty, what should be the research facilities which should be available both in government funded, public funded institutions and private funded institutions, definitely the private sector and the public sector can contribute together. If you take some of the world-class universities, including Ivy League universities in the United States or European universities, but West European universities, though they are funded basically by the state, large number of endowments have been created by the industry, by the business, and huge research projects are funded by the business. So these are some of the things which India should do immediately. Although we have some very classic examples like Tatas, Birlas, and a few others in the south, the Tyagaraja Chettiar and others, TVS, they have really understood the role of education and research. Often we talk about R&D, research and development. It is nothing but sustaining your educational system in a competitive mode to equal the standards of other universities elsewhere in the world. That alone can sustain even the quality of business. If you don't have quality education and quality research, there is no development. And if there is no development, your industry cannot simply survive in the global market. And therefore, the need to support education, research, training, all this will have to be understood by the industry, by the private sector, and accordingly they have to invest. There are one or two recent examples which are really encouraging. For example, Asim Premji, he has allocated a huge amount of money. Then Shivnada and Jindal and others. And these are all extensions of what a person like Tata did even more than 100 years ago. Had there been a chain of such contributions from different industrial houses in India, I don't think we will be really worrying about private sector or PPP, public-private partnership and all that only recently. It should have happened long back. Now at least it has started happening and it should be further strengthened.
Professor Ramanujan, what are your views on open and distance learning education in India?
Well, as the term suggests, open and distance learning, openness is the philosophy, distance is the mode, and learning is the focus. So if you look at each of the categories, the universities should be open to people, open to ideas, open to places, and open to every other stakeholder who would come out with some innovative ideas, new ideas. So that part of the openness as a philosophy is to be understood. Then distance. Distance is the mode. You don't have to have people at different, in different places at the same time to have the classroom situation kind of atmosphere. You can liberate, you can remove the constraints. Then learning. It is not so much on teaching, but learning. You create the environment, you provide the resources, provide the opportunities, allow the people to learn on their own. And here the teacher would become a facilitator rather than a provider of knowledge, which is okay maybe even 100 years ago, but it is no more valid because you have to learn, and learning has to take place when teacher and the student come together. It is learning for both. So if I am a teacher, I am also a learner, and if I am a student, I am also a teacher, though it is not recognized. So that's what it really means. Now, if you look at the operational side of it, open learning is absolutely necessary to give access, to give seats, admit people for various programs, and that is what we are trying to do.
Great. Professor Ramanujan, what should be done to produce industry-ready knowledge and workforce in India, and what are the challenges in terms of employment?
Well, education should not be all the time tuned to meet the needs of the market. Education is a much wider term. But at the same time, you can't have educated people who do not have any means of living to further their education. And therefore, we have to look at education with the purpose, which can also guarantee your bread and butter, which means employment. If certain degree holders, graduates, cannot be employed, if they are seen as unemployable, then I think there is something seriously wrong with the kind of degrees and diplomas that we are churning out. So, and therefore, education should lead to employment. And in a poor country like us, I don't think we can afford to neglect employment and then focus on education for the sake of education. That may be okay in certain aristocratic circles in the olden days, and even now those who have a lot of money, for whom job doesn't matter. But in our case, everyone is looking for education because they want to go for employment. And therefore, the institutions must focus on that. From the industry side, they must collaborate with institutions. They should have a dialogue and they should tell them what kind of curriculum we should design and what kind of graduates you have to produce. One simple example, you may have MAs, even PhDs, and when you employ them, they won't be able to express themselves properly. Then what kind of employment they can look for? And the industry is acutely aware of that. Communication skills, the so-called soft skills, leadership skills, organizational skills. These are some of the issues which the industry should provide to the educational institutions and the policymakers, and the educational policymakers and institutions should look at the real need for it so that the employed people are, educated people are really employed by your own industry or industry elsewhere.
Sir, are you satisfied with the CSR initiatives started by various industries in education?
Well, we talk a lot about CSR, corporate social responsibility. It's a good concept. And if you take some advanced countries, both in the West and the East, the industry is more enlightened. The business people, the corporate sector is more enlightened about certain corporate responsibilities. When you get so much from society, a part of it also should go back to the society. Now, this is not just because of a sense of justice or a sense of philanthropy. It has now become a necessity. If you amass wealth and display that wealth in your luxuries, and if you neglect the large part of the society without doing something for the basic things which people need, I think in the long run, you won't have a place to exist as a successful corporate player. And therefore, in the interest of the corporate sector itself, it must accept the social responsibility.
Yeah.
Otherwise, without being seen, it would lose its ground where it stands. And that is the core issue, that they should not think that they are doing some charity. It is part of the social responsibility. It is for their own interest. If they don't do that, without their knowledge, something will happen and then they may lose ground, an opportunity.
Great.
Okay.
So, in terms of enrollment, India has among the largest number of students in the higher education institutions. But the gross enrollment ratio is much less as compared to global standards. So, what should be done to mitigate these challenges?
I think it is again the question of demand and supply.
Yeah.
And your absolute numbers in terms of enrollments at different levels may be huge, may be mind-boggling. 18 million or around 20 million at higher education level and so many millions at the school level. But then we should also remember what is the population of India. It is 1.21 billion, next only to China. Then where do we stand in comparison with the minimum participation or minimum standard to become a superpower? I think the world average is 23% of participation by the people in the age group of 18 to 23 or 25. In our case, it is only 12. And if you take the number of universities China has, and where do we stand? And if you look at the percentage of participation of the people at that age group, in Norway and Sweden it is 95. In Canada it is above 90%. In US it is above 75%. In France, Germany, Japan it's above 80%. And where do we stand? With 12%. So when you look at these things in terms of the total population, I think our numbers are very less. I would not call them large numbers. I think these numbers are much less in comparison to the kind of demand that is there. So we have to create a new type of approaches to expand our school education, primary education in the first place. State funding has to be improved, although the debate has been there for more than 50 years, from the days of our first Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru, to have 6% of the GDP So far, we have not touched even 2 or 3%. Maybe, exceptionally, in 1 or 2 years, it might have touched 4%, but that can be taken only as an exception rather than as a rule. So, on an average, if you look at the contribution of the state, allocation of the budget, it is hardly 2% of the GDP. In my view, it should be 15%. Unless you have the pyramid with a large base, then you can't push people up. And if more and more people want to go for higher education, you need more and more good schools, not just schools with buildings and with poorly trained teachers. Now, that apart, you also need qualified teachers. And neighborhood school can be one possible solution, which is working very well in UK and so many other countries. Suppose you are a powerful man, a rich man, and you are living in an area where you have only a government school, corporate school. Your child should be admitted only there, not in a place which is 30 kilometers away. Now, when that kind of neighborhood school concept is given importance, then all the people who have the clout, who have the money, who also have a voice, they would go and talk to the teachers, talk to the management, improve the conditions of teaching and learning, and that will lead to comparable standards in school education. Similar things should happen with regard to colleges, with regard to universities, research institutions. Right now that is not happening. Take for example, why one college in Delhi University should fix the cutoff as 100%. And there are other colleges outside Delhi which do not have students. Now this scenario must disappear. It should be changed only by imposing the minimum standards. If you don't have minimum infrastructure, minimum qualified faculty members in required numbers and other facilities, that college, that university should not be allowed. And if they have problems, let the state intervene. Let the state create. For example, 22 colleges in Delhi University region, catchment area, have remained as 22 for, I think, almost 50 years. Right now, it should be at least 200 colleges. Then you can take all the qualified students coming out with a large percentage after the examination of +2, and a large number of people who are coming to Delhi to look for better education. And similar things should also happen at other states, at the district level, at the taluk level. Then only we can bridge this kind of disparity. Otherwise, the elite will always control the small number of seats available, and it is not rational.
Professor Ramanujan, what is your message to the educationists to achieve the goals of inclusive education in India?
I think that inclusive education is a very nice sounding, sweet phrase. But inclusion of what? Who will include whom? To my understanding, inclusive education means that there has to be provision to accommodate diversity. Say, for example, the gender diversity, rural urban diversity, disabilities, people with disabilities, people coming from different communities, religions, color, regions. All of them must be accommodated in a system without threatening their identity or without bringing in a kind of hierarchy that so and so is much superior and so is not so superior because of any of these issues. I think that kind of education would mean inclusion. Now, if you look at the participation of disadvantaged sections, particularly the disabled people or the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, the participation is very low. This morning I attended a meeting convened by the Planning Commission and MHRD. The participation of female population belonging to scheduled castes is just 2%. Participation of disabled children is less than 1%. And if you look at the composition, I think the disabled population constitutes easily 10 to 12% of the total population. But the participation in education is less than 1%. Employment still less. Now, inclusive education should recognize these disparities and make special efforts, allot special funding to bring them up on par with the people who are usually seen as the fortunate or the lucky. So that should be the focus of an inclusive education.
Yes, sir.
We need plans. We need special efforts. Yeah.
So do you think that there is any role of media in education?
Yes, media has a very great role. I think when this one goes on the air or when you telecast, large number of people will be in a position to listen to what experts say about various issues. And media has a responsibility to highlight the basic issues of a society. And what are the basic issues? Food, health, employment, harmony, that is peace. Now, these are the issues which need constant attention of the media because they are mass media. On the other hand, our media, I think, is either silent with regard to education or only when some scams break out in a university or a college, it will be shown, both in the electronic media and in the print media. That has to be regular feature, both in the press media and electronic media, on the kind of issues. For example, this World Summit is taking place. How many papers, national dailies, and how many TV channels have brought out important issues during the last 3 days? I do not know because I only saw a few, very scanty news items because some very important person comes at the minister's level or at a very higher political level. Now that becomes the news. Instead, apart from that, it should be, of course, necessary, but what is the theme of the conference? Who are the people who come and speak on issues? Why can't the press bring out at least 3-column news every day for 3 days? And there may be so many such events focusing on education, health, rural development, and so many others. It doesn't happen. So they are more concerned about sensation and also out of proportion when it comes to focus. See, for example, some unfortunate thing happens like our terrorist attacks in Mumbai. It has to be highlighted and people should be alerted and all. But 24 hours when you go on talking about it, it has its opposite effect. You demoralize. When you ignore other important issues, you lose balance. Now, I think that is where the media has to be, I should say, educated as to how to cover educational issues and other social issues. Okay?
Yeah, my last question is, who is your role model and what is your dream?
I don't know how to answer that question. I have so many role models, all the great thinkers, starting from my childhood. I used to admire Gandhi, Subhash Bose, Jawaharlal Nehru, and later when I went to the college, then the world was very open to me to think about all the European thinkers, scholars like Plato, Aristotle, Immanuel Kant, Hegel, Karl Marx, Lenin, and in India, so many stalwarts who contributed to the Indian philosophical systems. All of them, I think at one time or other, were role models. And I used to admire the romantic poets like Shelley, Byron, Keats, Milton, and of the political leaders of the 20th century, apart from Nehru, Gandhi, Lenin and others, Franklin D. Roosevelt, FDR, was another inspiring figure. So I can't say that there was any one role model. I think all of them had their influences. Maybe I derived inspiration from each one of them. It's very difficult for me to say who was my role model. Yeah. And the dream, of course, I would like to see that the poorest person in this country should also get an opportunity to get the best education which the richest child gets in this capital. When that happens, I think my dream will be fulfilled.
Thank you, sir.